Captain Sarah Chen had been 17 when the Galactic Council rendered their verdict. Now at 67, she could still remember every word of High Chancellor Vexhi's closing statement, as if it had been burned into her memory with acid. Humanity has proven itself incapable of peaceful coexistence, the tall crystalline being had declared from his elevated podium in the Grand Assembly Hall. His voice resonated through the chamber's acoustic perfection, ensuring that every one of the 237 species representatives heard his words clearly. Their aggressive tendencies, their refusal to follow established protocols, and their persistent interference in matters beyond their understanding make them a clear and present danger to galactic stability. Sarah's fingers unconsciously traced the scar that ran from her left temple to her jawline, a souvenir from the Battle of Kepler 442, where she had earned both her reputation and her exile. The battle that had saved 3 million Zentari refugees, but it also violated 7 different galactic treaties in the process. The observation deck of Research Station Omega-7 was quiet except for the gentle hum of the life support systems. Through the reinforced viewport, the Horsehead Nebula painted the darkness in brilliant shades of red and gold. It was beautiful, Sarah admitted, but beauty meant little when you were watching it alone. "Contact on long-range sensors," came the voice of Lieutenant Marcus Rodriguez from the bridge. His voice carried the practiced calm of someone who had spent decades in the void between stars, but Sarah could detect the underlying tension. After 50 years of complete radio silence from the inner galaxy, any contact was cause for concern. Sarah pushed herself off from the viewport and activated her magnetic boots, the familiar click echoing in the observation deck as they engaged with the deck plating. She had learned long ago that in space you never knew when gravity might become a luxury you couldn't afford. "Configuration and heading?" she asked, activating the comm panel built into the wall. 3 ships, Admiral. Heavy cruiser class by the energy signatures. They're not broadcasting any identification, but their drive signatures are definitely Council technology. Altarian Empire by the look of it. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the station's climate controls. The Altarian Empire had been the driving force behind humanity's exile. High Chancellor Vexhi had made it his personal mission to ensure that humans were not just expelled from the Council, but completely cut off from galactic civilization. For Altarian ships to be this far out in the Rim territories was unprecedented. Time to intercept? At their current velocity, approximately 6 hours, Admiral. Admiral. The title still felt strange after all these years. When humanity had been banished, the Earth Defense Force had been dissolved overnight. But the 50,000 humans scattered across the Outer Rim settlements had needed leadership, protection, and most importantly, hope. Sarah had never asked for the job, but she had accepted it because someone had to. Maintain long-range monitoring and activate the early warning network. I want every settlement from here to the Magellanic Clouds to know we have company. Understood, Admiral. Should we begin evacuation procedures? Sarah paused, considering the question. Standard protocol would be to scatter, to disappear into the vast emptiness between the galaxies, where even the most advanced sensors would lose them. They had become masters of invisibility over the past 5 decades, a skill born of necessity rather than choice. Not yet, she decided. If they wanted us dead, they wouldn't have announced their presence by burning hard on direct approach vectors. They want to talk. After 50 years of silence, someone from the inner galaxy finally wanted to talk. Sarah made her way through the station's corridors, passing the hydroponic gardens that fed the crew and the workshops where human ingenuity had learned to make miracles from scrap metal and spare parts. Research Station Omega-7 wasn't much to look at, a collection of modified cargo containers connected by flexible tunnels and held together by determination and recycled atmosphere processes. But it was home to 300 humans and served as the unofficial capital of what the galaxy had dismissively termed the Human Exile Fleet. The bridge was a testament to human adaptability. What had once been the cargo bay of a decommissioned freighter now housed a command center that could coordinate operations across half a dozen star systems. Holographic displays showed the positions of the 87 settlements that comprised their scattered civilization, while communication arrays maintained contact across distances that would have been impossible using conventional technology. Status report, Sarah said as she entered the bridge. Lieutenant Rodriguez turned from his station, his graying hair a reminder that most of the original exiles were well into their later years. The ships have maintained course and speed. No weapons charge, but their shields are active. Standard diplomatic configuration. Commander Elena Vasquez, the station's chief of operations, looked up from her tactical display. I've been running analyses on their drive signatures. These aren't just any Altarian ships, Admiral. That lead vessel is the Crystalline Harmony, Chancellor Vexhi's personal flagship. Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. Vexay himself, coming to the Rim territories, the being who had spent years convincing the Council that humanity was a threat to galactic peace, was now traveling further from Altarian space than any of his kind had ever ventured. Any idea what he wants? Rodriguez asked. Sarah shook her head. No, but whatever it is, it's big enough to bring him personally. Alina, what's the status of our rapid response fleet? 12 ships ready to deploy within the hour. Nothing that could stand up to those cruisers in a straight fight, but fast enough to evacuate the outer settlements if necessary. And our special projects? Elena's expression grew serious. Project Prometheus is ready for field testing. Project Sisyphus is still in development, but the prototypes show promise. Sarah nodded. During their exile, humanity hadn't just survived, they had innovated. Cut off from galactic trade and technology, they had been forced to develop their own solutions to problems that the galaxy had considered solved centuries ago. Some of those solutions were conventional improvements on existing technology. Others were revolutionary leaps that redefined what was possible. Sir, Rodriguez interrupted. Incoming transmission from the lead ship. Put it through. The main holographic display shimmered and resolved into the familiar figure of High Chancellor Vexay. The Altarian leader looked exactly as Sarah remembered. Tall, crystalline, and coldly beautiful. But something was different. The absolute confidence that had characterized his bearing 50 years ago was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like desperation. Captain Chen. Vexay's voice carried the same harmonic undertones that made Altarian speech so distinctive, but the usual authority was strained. I trust you remember me. I remember you, Chancellor, Sarah replied, her voice carefully neutral. Though I'm surprised to see you so far from home. The last time we spoke, you made it quite clear that humanity's presence in civilized space was unwelcome. Vexay's crystalline features shifted in what might have been regret. Much has changed since that day, Captain. The galaxy faces a threat that we cannot handle alone. And you think humanity can help? Sarah couldn't keep the skepticism out of her voice. The same humanity that you described as dangerously unpredictable and a threat to cosmic order. Yes, Vexay said simply. Because your unpredictability is exactly what we need. Sarah exchanged glances with Rodriguez and Vasquez. This was not what any of them had expected. Perhaps you could elaborate, Chancellor. You'll understand if we're somewhat surprised by this change in attitude. Vexay's image flickered as he appeared to gather himself. Captain, 3 years ago we made contact with a species from outside our galaxy. We followed all established protocols for first contact. We offered them membership in the Council, access to our trade networks, and the benefits of our collective knowledge. And they accepted. They integrated into our society, established colonies on dozens of worlds, and seemed to embrace our values of peace and cooperation. Vexay paused, and when he continued, his voice was hollow. It was all a lie. Sarah leaned forward in her command chair. What happened? They called themselves the Devourers, though we didn't learn their true nature until it was too late. They don't just conquer worlds, Captain. They consume them. Not just the resources, but everything. The atmosphere, the crust, even the electromagnetic field that protects a planet from cosmic radiation. When they're done, nothing remains but a cold, dead rock floating in space. The bridge fell silent. Sarah had seen her share of warfare over the years, but what Vexay was describing went beyond conquest. It was complete annihilation. How many worlds, she asked? 47 core systems have been completely consumed. Another 112 are under attack. Our fleets can't stop them, Captain. Every time we engage them, they adapt. They learn our tactics, counter our strategies, and turn our own technological advantages against us. Vasquez spoke up from her station. With respect, Chancellor, what does this have to do with us? Humanity was exiled precisely because we refused to follow your established protocols. Why would you think we could succeed where your combined fleets have failed? Vexay's crystalline eyes fixed on the camera, and for the first time in their conversation, Sarah saw something that looked like hope. "'Cause you don't think like us," he said. "For 1,000 years, the Galaxy Council has maintained peace through order, predictability, and adherence to established doctrine. Our military strategies, our diplomatic approaches, even our scientific methods all follow patterns that have been refined over millennia. And the Devourers can read those patterns," Sarah realized. "Exactly. They study us, learn our methods, and counter them before we can implement them. But humans..." Vexay paused. Humans are chaos. Brilliant, terrifying, magnificent chaos. You don't follow our patterns because you've never learned them. You solve problems in ways that no rational being would consider, and that unpredictability might be the only thing that can surprise them. Sarah sat back in her chair, processing what she had just heard. After 50 years of exile, the galaxy wanted humanity back, not despite their differences, but because of them. What exactly are you proposing, Chancellor? Full readmission to the Galactic Council with retroactive restoration of all rights and privileges. Access to our shipyards, our technology, and our resources. Command authority over joint council human task forces. Vexai leaned forward, and his voice dropped to almost a whisper. And a formal apology from every species that voted for your exile. The offer was staggering. Everything that humanity had lost and more, handed back on a crystal platter. Sarah could see Rodriguez and Vasquez struggling to process the implications. That's quite an offer, Sarah said carefully. But you'll forgive me if I point out that the last time humanity trusted the Council's promises, we ended up scattered across the Rim territories with kill orders on our heads if we tried to return. I understand your skepticism, Bexday replied. But Captain, if we don't stop the Devourers, there won't be a galaxy left to argue about. Sarah stood up from her command chair and walked closer to the holographic display. Even if we accept your proposal, Chancellor, what makes you think 50,000 exiled humans can accomplish what your millions of ships and billions of soldiers cannot? For the first time since the conversation began, Vex High smiled, a subtle shift in his crystalline features that nonetheless conveyed genuine warmth. Because, Captain Chen, in 50 years of exile, humanity has done something that the rest of the galaxy forgot was possible. You've evolved. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Evolved? Your settlements don't just survive in the Rim territories, they thrive. Your technology isn't just functional, it's revolutionary. Your people don't just endure hardship, they turn it into opportunity. Vexai's image leaned forward. We know about your innovations, Captain. Faster-than-light communication without quantum entanglement, matter conversion without antimatter, shield technology that doesn't rely on energy projection. You've solved problems that our greatest minds said were impossible. Sarah kept her expression neutral, but inside she was impressed. Apparently, the Council's intelligence network was better than they had given it credit for. Project Prometheus, Project Sisyphus, and a dozen others had been developed in the deepest secrecy, but somehow the Altarians knew about them. Even if that's true, Sarah said, why should we help? The galaxy made its position clear 50 years ago. We're dangerous, remember? A threat to cosmic order. Because, Vexai said quietly, despite everything we did to you, you're still human. And humans don't abandon people who need help, even when those people have wronged them. Sarah felt a flash of anger at the manipulation, but she had to admit that Vexai wasn't wrong. Even after decades of exile, most humans still thought of themselves as part of the larger galactic community. The idea of standing by while entire civilizations were consumed went against everything they believed in. I need time to consider your proposal, Sarah said finally, and I'll need to consult with the other settlement leaders. Of course. But Captain, time is a luxury we don't have much of. The Devourers are moving faster than our models predicted. At their current rate of expansion, they'll reach the core worlds within 2 years. How long can you hold them, with our current capabilities? 6 months, perhaps 8, if we're very lucky. Sarah nodded grimly. I'll give you an answer within 72 hours. Thank you, Captain. I know we have no right to ask for your help, but... Chancellor, Sarah interrupted. There's something you should know. My name isn't Captain Chen anymore. It's Admiral Chen. I speak for all of humanity now, and I have for the last 37 years. Vexai's crystalline features registered surprise. Admiral? But Earth Defense Force was dissolved when you exiled us. Yes, but the 50,000 humans you scattered across the Rim didn't just disappear, Chancellor. We regrouped. We organized. We built something new. Sarah's voice carried quiet pride. We built something better. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in contemplative silence. Rodriguez was the first to speak. Admiral, what do you think? Sarah stared at the empty holographic display for a long moment. I think, she said slowly, that we're about to find out whether 50 years in the wilderness has made us strong enough to save the galaxy that abandoned us. Outside the viewport, the Horsehead Nebula continued its ancient dance across the darkness, beautiful and eternal. But for the first time in 50 years, Sarah Chen wondered if she was looking at something that might not survive to be seen by future generations. The galaxy was calling for help. The question now was whether humanity would answer. Admiral Sarah Chen stood in the center of what had once been the cargo bay of a massive ore hauler, now converted into the largest meeting space in human exile territory. Representatives from 87 different settlements filled the chamber, their faces displaying the weathered determination that had become the hallmark of humanity's diaspora. Some attended in person, having traveled weeks through hyperspace to reach Research Station Omega-7. Others appeared as holographic projections, their images flickering occasionally as ancient communication equipment struggled to maintain stable connections across impossible distances. This was the Human Exile Council, a governing body that had evolved organically from necessity rather than design. Unlike the rigid hierarchies and formal protocols of the Galactic Council, the Human Assembly operated on principles of consensus and earned respect. Every settlement, from the massive industrial complex of New Geneva in the Cygnus Arm to the tiny research outpost of Hope's End orbiting a brown dwarf near the galactic rim, had an equal voice. "Before we begin," Sarah announced, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustic systems, "I want everyone to understand exactly what we're discussing today. This isn't just about whether we help the galaxy. This is about whether we forgive it." Marcus Webb, the grizzled representative from the mining colony of Titan's Reach, stood up. At 83, he was one of the few people in the room who remembered Earth before the exile. His artificial leg, a replacement for one lost in a mining accident, clicked against the deck plating as he shifted his weight. "Admiral," Webb's voice carried the authority of someone who had spent decades making life-or-death decisions in the asteroid belts. "Before we talk about forgiveness, let's talk about trust. We've built something good out here. Something that's ours. Why should we risk it to save people who threw us away like garbage?" A murmur of agreement rippled through the assembly. Dr. Eleanor Vasquez, attending as the representative of the research stations, activated her projection unit and stood up. Her image appeared enlarged above the crowd, ensuring everyone could see her clearly. "Because, Marcus, we're not them," she said simply. "We don't abandon people who need help, even when those people have wronged us. That's what makes us human." "Pretty words," countered Captain James Harrison from the agricultural world of Second Eden. "But let's talk about reality. We have children out here, Admiral. Families. Communities that have never known anything but the Rim territories. Are we really going to risk their lives to bail out the same governments that branded us as criminals?" Sarah had expected this argument. The younger generation of humans, those born in exile, had no emotional connection to the inner galaxy. To them, the Council worlds were just another foreign power, no different from any other potential threat. "James raises a valid point," said Dr. Keiko Tanaka from the Deep Space Observatory at Farpoint Station. Her holographic image was clearer than most, a benefit of the advanced communication equipment her station had developed. "But I think we need to consider the broader implications. If the Devourers consume the inner galaxy, do we really think they'll stop there?" Commander Michael Santos from the Fortress world of Last Stand crossed his arms. His settlement had been built around an old Earth Defense Force weapons depot, and its inhabitants had spent decades preparing for exactly this kind of threat. "Dr. Tanaka is right," Santos said. "I've been analyzing the tactical data that Chancellor Vexay shared with us. The Devourer expansion pattern is aggressive but systematic. They're not randomly destroying worlds, they're consuming them in a specific order that maximizes resource acquisition while minimizing resistance." Santos activated his own projection system, displaying a three-dimensional map of the galaxy. Red dots marked consumed worlds, while yellow indicated systems currently under attack. The pattern was clearly visible, an expanding wave of destruction moving steadily outward from the galactic core. "At their current rate of expansion," Santos continued, "they'll reach the Rim territories within 5 to 7 years. We can't hide from this threat, people. It's coming whether we help the Council or not." Representative Lisa Chen from the trading hub of New Shanghai, no relation to Admiral Chen despite the shared surname, stood up. Her settlement had maintained the most extensive network of black market contacts with Council space, making her one of the most informed people about inner galaxy politics. "There's another factor we need to consider," she said. "The Council isn't united in this request. My sources tell me that the Altarian Empire is pushing for human assistance, but at least 6 other major species are opposed. They'd rather see their civilizations consumed than admit they need help from exiled humans." This revelation caused an immediate stir in the assembly. Admiral Chen raised her hand for silence, then looked at Lisa expectantly. "Which species?" "The Zentari Collective, the Vorthak Federation, the Silicon Commonwealth, the Ethereal Hierarchy, the Crystalline Union, and the Hive Mind Aggregation," Lisa rattled off. Apparently there was a heated debate in the Emergency Council session. High Chancellor Vexhai had to invoke ancient emergency protocols to override their objections. Doctor, Vasquez shook her head in disgust. So they're facing extinction, and half the council would rather die than ask for our help. Pride, said Marcus Webb grimly. It's always pride with these people. They can't admit they might have been wrong about us. Admiral Chen walked to the center of the assembly, her magnetic boots clicking against the deck plating. She had worn her old Earth Defense Force uniform for this meeting, a deliberate choice that reminded everyone of what they had once been and what they had become. I've been thinking about this for 3 days, she said, and I keep coming back to the same question. What do we owe them? The chamber fell silent. Legally, we owe them nothing, Sarah continued. They exiled us, stripped us of our citizenship, and forbade us from returning on pain of death. Morally, we could make an argument that they deserve whatever fate befalls them. She paused, looking around the room at the faces of people who had built new lives from the ashes of their old ones. But that's not the question I'm asking. The question is, what do we owe ourselves? What do we owe the children born in exile, who deserve a galaxy where they're free to travel and explore and dream? What do we owe the future generations who might inherit nothing but ruins because we were too proud to set aside our anger? Representative Torres, from the industrial world of New Vulcan, stood up. His settlement had become the manufacturing heart of human exile territory, producing everything from starship components to atmospheric processes. Admiral, if we do this, if we help them, what guarantees do we have that they won't just exile us again once the threat is over? It was the question Sarah had been dreading, because the honest answer was none. They had no guarantees at all. We don't, she said simply. We have Chancellor Vexhai's word and the formal invitation from the Altarian Empire. But history suggests that gratitude has a short half-life in galactic politics. Dr. Tanaka's hologram flickered as she leaned forward. Then why are we even considering this? Sarah looked up at the massive viewing ports that lined the chamber, showing the star-filled darkness beyond. Because someone has to be better than they are. Someone has to choose hope over fear, cooperation over isolation, forgiveness over revenge. She turned back to the assembly. 50 years ago, we were exiled because they said we were too dangerous, too unpredictable. They were wrong about us being dangerous. We've never started a war, never conquered a world, never enslaved another species. But they were right about us being unpredictable. A small smile played across Sarah's face. They expected us to disappear into the darkness, to either die quietly or eventually come crawling back, begging for readmission. Instead, we thrived. We built something new. We became something unprecedented in galactic history, a civilization without a homeworld, bound together not by geography or species, but by shared values and mutual respect. Commander Santos stood up again. Admiral, what exactly are you proposing? I'm proposing that we negotiate from a position of strength, Sarah replied. We go back, but not as supplicants. We go back as equals, with our own agenda and our own conditions. She activated the main holographic display, showing a detailed organizational chart that she had been working on for the past 3 days. If we do this, we do it our way. No integration into existing council fleets. No subordination to council commanders. We operate as an independent ally, with our own chain of command, our own objectives, and our own methods. Representative Webb squinted at the display. What kind of conditions? Full diplomatic immunity for all human personnel. Immediate recognition of human territorial claims in the Rim territories. Access to council technology and resources, but with the understanding that anything we develop remains our intellectual property. And most importantly, a formal treaty guaranteeing that humanity can never again be exiled from galactic civilization without unanimous consent of all member species. The implications were staggering. Sarah wasn't just proposing that humanity help with the Devourer crisis, she was proposing that they return as a major galactic power. Vasquez whistled softly. Admiral, do you really think the Council will accept those terms? But Chancellor Vexhai traveled personally to the Rim territories to ask for our help. Their fleets are losing battles, their worlds are being consumed, and their conventional strategies have proven completely ineffective against an enemy that adapts faster than they can respond. Sarah gestured to the tactical display that Santos had shown earlier. Look at that map. Really look at it. The Devourers aren't just winning, they're accelerating. Every world they consume makes them stronger, and every Council fleet they defeat teaches them more about galactic military doctrine. At this rate, the Council has months, not years. Representative Chen from New Shanghai stood up. Admiral, even if they accept our terms, we're still talking about fewer than 100 ships against an enemy that's defeated fleets of thousands. Numbers aren't everything, Lisa. The Council has been fighting the Devourers using predictable tactics for 3 years and losing consistently. We've had 50 years to develop completely different approaches to warfare, technology, and problem-solving. Santos nodded slowly. Project Prometheus alone could change the entire dynamic of space combat. And if we can field test Project Sisyphus, he didn't finish the sentence, but everyone in the room understood. Humanity's exile had forced them to develop technologies that the Council had never imagined, solutions to problems that galactic civilization had considered impossible. Tanaka's hologram leaned forward. Admiral, there's one more thing we need to consider. If we go back, we can't come back. I mean, we can physically return to the Rim territories, but the moment we re-enter Council space, we become part of galactic civilization again. The isolation that's allowed us to develop our unique perspectives will be lost forever. Sarah nodded grimly. That's the real price we're talking about, isn't it? Our independence. Our unique identity. The very things that make us valuable to the Council are the things we'd risk losing by joining them. The chamber fell silent as representatives contemplated the magnitude of the choice before them. They could remain in exile, maintaining their independence but potentially watching the galaxy burn. Or they could return to civilization, possibly saving countless lives but risking everything they had built. Marcus Webb stood up slowly, his artificial leg whirring quietly as he rose. Admiral, I want to tell you something. 50 years ago, when I was loaded onto that transport ship with the other exiles from Earth, I thought my life was over. I thought we were being sent out here to die. He looked around the chamber, his eyes taking in the faces of people who had become family over the decades of shared hardship. But you know what? This has been the best 50 years of my life. Out here, we've built something pure, something good. We've raised children who've never known war, who've never seen species hatred, who think that cooperation and mutual respect are just the way the universe works. Webb's voice grew stronger as he continued. But those children deserve more than just our little corner of the Rim territories. They deserve a galaxy where they can explore and learn and contribute to something bigger than themselves. He turned to face Admiral Chen directly. If there's a chance, even a small one, that we can save the galaxy and still preserve what we've built out here, then I think we have to try. The vote, when it came, was closer than Sarah had expected, but decisive nonetheless. 62 settlements voted to accept the Council's request for assistance, 23 voted against, and 2 abstained. It wasn't unanimous, but it was enough. As representatives began filing out of the chamber, making preparations to return to their settlements and begin mobilization, Dr. Vasquez approached Admiral Chen.
Sarah, are you sure about this?
Admiral Chen looked out at the stars through the chamber's massive viewport, thinking about all the worlds out there that might soon cease to exist if they failed.
No, she said honestly.
But I think that's exactly why we have to do it. If we were sure, if we had guarantees and certainties and perfectly calculated risk assessments, we'd be thinking like the Council. And thinking like the Council is exactly what got them into this mess in the first place. She turned away from the viewport and began walking toward the exit. Besides, Elena, we're humans. When did we ever let impossible odds stop us from doing what was right? As the chamber lights dimmed and the last representatives departed, Admiral Chen couldn't shake the feeling that they had just made a decision that would echo through galactic history. For better or worse, humanity was going home. The human fleet that approached Council space 3 weeks later bore little resemblance to the ragtag collection of converted civilian vessels that had limped away from Earth 50 years earlier. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the flagship Prometheus, watching through the main viewport as the massive defensive installations of the Altarian border came into view. The sight took her breath away, just as it had 5 decades ago. The Altarian Nexus was a marvel of engineering, artificial structure the size of a small moon, bristling with defensive weapons and housing the most advanced shipyards in the galaxy. Crystalline towers reached out into space like frozen lightning, their surfaces gleaming with the same ethereal light that characterized all Altarian technology. But now, she noticed, the Nexus showed signs of desperate haste. Half-constructed warships floated in the construction bays, their hulls incomplete, and their weapon systems obviously jury-rigged. Damaged vessels crowded the repair facilities, their scarred armor telling the story of unsuccessful encounters with the Devourer forces. "Admiral," came the voice of Commander Elena Vasquez from the tactical station. "We're receiving a priority transmission from the Nexus Command Center. Put it through." The main holographic display shimmered to life, revealing the image of High Chancellor Vexi. The Altarian leader looked even more haggard than he had 3 weeks ago, and Sarah could see stress fractures in his crystalline features, a sure sign of extreme exhaustion among his species. Admiral Chen, Vex's harmonic voice carried obvious relief. Welcome to Altarian space. I confess there were moments when I feared you would not come. We keep our promises, Chancellor, Sarah replied. Though I notice our reception committee seems a bit sparse. Indeed, only a single Altarian cruiser had moved to escort them through the border defenses. Under normal circumstances, a fleet of unknown vessels approaching Council space would have been met by an overwhelming show of force. Vex's crystalline features shifted in what might have been embarrassment. I apologize for the reduced ceremony, Admiral. Most of our fleet is currently engaged in the Rigel sector, attempting to slow the Devourer advance toward the core worlds. How bad is it? The situation has deteriorated significantly since our last communication. The Devourers consumed the Deneb system 4 days ago. 15 billion souls, Admiral. Gone in less than 36 hours. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The Deneb system had been one of the galaxy's major population centers, home to 3 different species and countless orbital habitats. The idea that such a massive concentration of life could simply cease to exist was almost incomprehensible. What's their current position? Advancing on 3 fronts toward the core systems. At their current rate of expansion, they'll reach Altarian Prime within 6 months. Sarah nodded grimly. Chancellor, we'll need full tactical briefings on all Devourer encounters, complete sensor logs, and access to any captured Devourer technology or debris. Of course, I've prepared comprehensive data packages for your review. However, I should warn you that the Council emergency session is scheduled to convene in 4 hours. Many of the representatives are skeptical about human involvement in our defense. Let me guess, they're worried we might actually succeed? Vex's harmonic laughter held no humor. Actually, Admiral, they're worried about what happens after we succeed. Your terms for assistance have caused quite a stir among the more conservative factions. Sarah had expected this. The conditions she had presented were unprecedented in galactic history. No member species had ever demanded such extensive autonomy and territorial recognition as a prerequisite for military assistance. The terms are non-negotiable, Chancellor. We've learned not to trust vague promises and future considerations. I understand completely, and I want you to know that the Altarian Empire fully supports your conditions. Unfortunately, not everyone shares my perspective. Commander Vasquez looked up from her station. Admiral, we're receiving docking clearance for the Nexus. They're assigning us to the diplomatic berths. Acknowledged. Sarah turned back to Vex's image. Chancellor, before we dock, there's something I want you to see. She gestured to Vasquez, who activated the external camera feeds. The display switched to show the human fleet from an outside perspective, and Sarah heard Vex's sharp intake of breath. The 96 ships that comprised humanity's response force looked like nothing else in known space. Instead of the sleek, elegant designs favored by Council shipbuilders, human vessels had aggressive, predatory appearance. Their hulls were angular and heavily armored, bristling with weapon systems that followed no conventional design principles. But it was the lead ship that drew the most attention. The Prometheus was massive, nearly 3 kilometers long, and built around a central core that pulsed with barely contained energy. Her hull was a dark gray that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and her weapon arrays crackled with unfamiliar technologies. Admiral, Vex's voice was barely a whisper. What am I looking at? 50 years of human ingenuity, Chancellor. When you cut us off from galactic technology, we had to develop our own solutions. Some of those solutions are unconventional. That ship's energy signature is unlike anything in our databases. Sarah smiled. That's Project Prometheus, our answer to your assumption that faster-than-light travel requires quantum entanglement corridors. The implications hit Vex high immediately. Quantum entanglement corridors were the foundation of all galactic transportation and communication. Every ship in Council space depended on the vast network of quantum beacons that allowed instantaneous travel between star systems. If humanity had developed alternative FTL technology, how, he asked. By ignoring everything the galaxy thought was impossible and starting from scratch. We've had 50 years to ask questions that no one else bothered asking, Chancellor. Questions like, what if quantum entanglement isn't the only way to fold space? What if the fundamental constants of physics aren't actually constant? What if the universe is far stranger and more malleable than anyone imagined? As the human fleet approached the docking facilities, Sarah could see crowds gathering at the observation ports. Word of their arrival was spreading throughout the Nexus, and beings from dozens of different species were straining to get a look at the exiled humans who had returned from the darkness. "Admiral," Vasquez said quietly, "I'm picking up massive amounts of communications traffic. News of our arrival is spreading throughout Council space." "What kind of response?" "Mixed. Some worlds are expressing gratitude and hope. Others are less enthusiastic. There are already calls for emergency legislative sessions to review our terms." Sarah wasn't surprised. The galaxy had spent 50 years convincing itself that humanity's exile was justified, that humans were inherently dangerous and unfit for civilized society. The sudden reversal of that narrative would be difficult for many species to accept. "Chancellor," she said, turning back to the holographic display, "we'll need accommodations for our diplomatic staff and secure facilities for our technical teams. We're bringing some technologies that the Council will want to examine, but we'll need guarantees about intellectual property protection." "Of course. Admiral, I should also inform you that several species representatives have requested immediate meetings. The Zentari Collective is particularly eager to speak with you." Sarah's expression hardened. The Zentari had been among the most vocal opponents of humanity during the original exile proceedings. Their representative, Ambassador Cathvar, had described humans as a species of barely controlled savages during the final council session. "I'll meet with anyone who wants to talk, Chancellor. That they should understand that we're not the same species that left here 50 years ago."
What do you mean?
Sarah gestured towards the viewport, where the Nexus was growing larger as they approached the docking facility. "The humans you exiled were refugees from a single world, overwhelmed by the complexity of galactic civilization and struggling to find their place among advanced species." She paused, watching as the massive docking clamps extended from the station to secure the Prometheus. "The humans who just arrived are the products of 50 years of isolation, hardship, and innovation. We've built our own civilization from nothing, developed technologies that didn't exist when we left, and forged a society based on principles that the Council has forgotten. Vex Hayes' crystalline features registered understanding. You're not refugees anymore." "No, Chancellor, we're not." 2 hours later, Sarah found herself walking through corridors she had hoped never to see again. The council chambers were exactly as she remembered. Soaring architecture designed to inspire awe and humility. Holographic displays showing the vastness of galactic civilization, and the subtle environmental controls that kept hundreds of different species comfortable in the same space. But now, those same chambers felt different. Smaller, somehow, less impressive. 50 years of living in converted cargo containers and jury-rigged space stations had given her a different perspective on what constituted true achievement.
"Admiral Chen," came a familiar voice from behind her.
She turned to see Ambassador Cathvar of the Zentari Collective approaching, his 6 arms moving in the complex gesture patterns that served as his species equivalent of formal greeting.
"Ambassador,"
Sarah replied, her voice carefully neutral. "I wasn't expecting to see you here. I requested this meeting personally," Cathvar said. His translator rendered his multitonal language into standard galactic with mechanical precision. "There are things that need to be said. By all means." Cathvar paused, his 4 eyes blinking in sequence, a sign of discomfort among his people. "Admiral, 50 years ago I said things about your species that I now realize were unjust and uninformed." Sarah raised an eyebrow. This was not what she had expected from the being who had compared humans to barely controlled savages.
"I was wrong," Cathvar continued.
"Catastrophically wrong. Your people were not savages. They were innovators. They were not dangerous. They were different. And we punished them for that difference, instead of trying to understand it." "What changed your mind, Ambassador?" 3 months ago, the Devourers reached Zentari space. In 6 hours, they consumed our primary colony world and everyone on it, including my eldest clutch sibling and her entire family line. Sarah felt a pang of sympathy despite her lingering anger. The loss of a clutch sibling was devastating to Zentari psychology, equivalent to losing a child and a best friend simultaneously. "I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you, but that's not why I'm telling you this." Cathvar's upper arms gestured toward the massive holographic display dominating the central chamber, showing the current state of the Devourer advance. "After we lost the colony, our military leaders tried everything they could think of to stop the advance. Every conventional strategy, every established tactic, every proven method. Let me guess, nothing worked. Worse than that, every time we engaged them, they learned from our attacks and adapted their defenses. Within days, tactics that had worked for centuries became useless. It was as if they could predict our every move. Sarah nodded. This matched the pattern that Chancellor Vexai had described. But then, Kethvar continued, one of our junior officers, a young female named Sithara who had studied pre-exile human military history, suggested something radical. Instead of following established doctrine, she proposed that we attack using what she called human-style chaos tactics. What did that involve? Unpredictability. Instead of coordinated fleet movements, we used individual ships making independent decisions. Instead of targeting strategic objectives, we hit random targets with no apparent pattern. Instead of following logical battle plans, we let our commanders improvise based on moment-to-moment assessments. Kethvar's four eyes focused intently on Sarah. It worked. For the first time since the Devourers arrived, we actually inflicted significant damage on their forces. Not enough to stop them, but enough to prove that unconventional thinking could succeed where traditional methods failed. And that's why you support our return? Admiral, for 50 years the Zentari Collective voted in every council session to maintain your species' exile. We convinced ourselves that galactic civilization was safer and more stable without human unpredictability. Kethvar's upper arms spread wide in a gesture of absolute sincerity. We were fools. Your unpredictability wasn't a flaw to be contained, it was a strength to be celebrated. And now that we face an enemy that can counter our every conventional move, that strength may be the only thing that can save us. Sarah studied the alien ambassador for a long moment. His admission of error seemed genuine, but 50 years of exile had taught her to be cautious about accepting diplomatic statements at face value. Ambassador, I appreciate your honesty, but you'll understand if I point out that admissions of error are easy to make when your species is facing extinction. Absolutely. That's why I'm not just offering an apology, I'm offering a formal alliance. The Zentari Collective will support all of your terms for readmission, provide unrestricted access to our research facilities and technological databases, and formally recognize human territorial claims in the Rim territories.
The offer was staggering.
The Zentari Collective controlled some of the most advanced research facilities in the galaxy, and their technological databases were legendary for their comprehensiveness. What do you want in return? Teach us, Kethvar said simply. Teach us how to think like humans. Show us how to see problems from angles we never considered. Help us rediscover the innovative thinking that we've lost after centuries of following established patterns. Sarah considered the request. It would mean sharing not just military tactics, but the fundamental thought processes that had allowed humanity to thrive in exile. The kind of deep cultural exchange that could reshape both civilizations. I'll take your proposal under advisement, Ambassador. But I should warn you that learning to think like humans isn't just about adopting different tactics. It's about embracing uncertainty, accepting failure as a learning opportunity, and being willing to question everything you think you know. Kethvar's translator was silent for a moment as it processed the complex emotional undertones of his response. Admiral, 3 months ago I would have considered such thinking to be a form of madness. Today, I consider it to be our only hope for survival. As if summoned by his words, the Chamber's announcement system activated with Chancellor Vixhai's harmonic tones, all representatives to the main assembly hall. Emergency session will commence in 30 minutes. Sarah looked around the chamber, seeing the hurried movement of beings from dozens of different species as they prepared for what would undoubtedly be one of the most important council sessions in galactic history. Ambassador, she said, it looks like we're about to find out just how willing the galaxy is to embrace human-style thinking. Kethvar's four eyes blinked in sequence, a gesture that his translator rendered as nervous laughter. Admiral, for all our sakes, I hope they're more willing than we were 50 years ago. As they walked toward the assembly hall together, the exiled human admiral and the alien ambassador who had voted for her exile, Sarah couldn't help but think that sometimes the most important changes began with the smallest admissions of error. The galaxy was about to learn what humanity had discovered during 50 years in the darkness, that survival often depended not on being right, but on being willing to be wrong in new and innovative ways. The emergency council session lasted 18 hours and nearly ended in complete breakdown 3 times. Admiral Sarah Chen sat in the observer's gallery, watching centuries of diplomatic protocol strain under the weight of desperation and wounded pride. Below her, representatives from 237 species argued, pleaded, and occasionally threatened each other, while the holographic displays showed the steady advance of devourer forces toward the galaxy's heart. The opposition to humanity's terms had been led by the ethereal hierarchy, whose representative, a being of pure energy contained within a crystalline matrix, had spent 4 hours explaining why granting autonomous status to a previously exiled species would undermine the fundamental principles upon which galactic civilization rests. The Silicon Commonwealth had presented elaborate mathematical proofs demonstrating that human demands for territorial recognition violated 17 different interstellar treaties. The Vorfak Federation had simply stated that they would rather face extinction than admit their judgment had been flawed. But as the hours passed and reports continued to arrive from the front lines, opposition began to crumble. The Devourers had consumed 2 more systems during the debate, and Council forces were in full retreat on all fronts. Reality, it seemed, had little patience for wounded pride. The final vote was closer than Chancellor Vexay had hoped, but decisive enough to matter. 147 species voted to accept human terms, 78 voted against, and 12 abstained. For the first time in galactic history, a previously exiled species had negotiated their return, not as supplicants but as equals. Now, 3 days after that historic vote, Sarah stood in the war room of the Council's primary military facility, staring at tactical displays that painted a picture of systematic disaster. Admiral Fexmore of the Vorthak Federation, the galaxy's most decorated military commander, was explaining the situation with the cold precision of someone who had spent his entire career studying warfare. The enemy's adaptation rate exceeds all previous models, Fexmore said, his scaled features betraying no emotion despite the catastrophic nature of his report. Initial contact suggested they required approximately 72 hours to analyze and counter our tactical approaches. Current data indicates they now accomplish the same analysis in under 6 hours. They're learning faster, Sarah observed, exponentially faster. Each engagement teaches them more about our methods, and they're able to apply that knowledge across their entire force structure instantaneously. Fexmore activated a new display showing engagement records from the past month. We've attempted 17 different strategic approaches in the last 30 days. All 17 were initially successful, then completely countered within hours of implementation. Dr. Elena Vasquez, who had been analyzing the tactical data for the past 2 days, looked up from her portable workstation. Admiral, this pattern is too consistent to be natural adaptation. They're not just learning from each encounter. They're predicting our responses. What do you mean? Look at the timing. Eleanor highlighted sections of the engagement data. In every case, their countermeasures appeared before our tactics had been fully implemented. They're not reacting to what we're doing. They're anticipating what we're going to do. Chancellor Vexay, who had been silent during most of the briefing, finally spoke. How is that possible? Sarah studied the data patterns, her mind working through the implications. Because we're predictable. All of these strategies follow logical progressions based on established military doctrine. The Devourers have learned to recognize the patterns and extrapolate our likely responses. Admiral Fexmore's scaled crest rose slightly, a sign of irritation among his species. Admiral Chen, these are not arbitrary patterns. These are proven strategies refined over millennia of successful warfare. They represent the accumulated military wisdom of hundreds of civilizations. Which is exactly the problem, Sarah replied. You're fighting a learning enemy using textbook approaches. Every time you implement a strategy that's been used before, you're essentially showing them the entire playbook. Then what do you suggest? Fexmore's tone carried barely concealed skepticism. That we abandon centuries of military science in favor of random actions? Sarah smiled. Not random, Admiral. Innovative. There's a difference. She gestured to Elena, who activated a new holographic display showing the human fleet's organizational structure. Unlike the rigid hierarchical patterns that characterized Council military doctrine, the human formation looked almost organic, ships grouped in loose clusters with no apparent central command structure. This is how we're going to approach the problem, Sarah explained. Instead of treating our fleet as a single coordinated force, we're going to treat it as 96 independent variables. Fexmore stared at the display. That's chaos. Exactly. The Devourers have learned to predict coordinated responses because coordination creates patterns. But if every ship in our fleet is operating under different tactical parameters, making independent decisions based on unique circumstances, there won't be any patterns to learn. Chancellor Vexay's crystalline features reflected confusion. But Admiral, how can you achieve strategic objectives without coordination? By redefining what constitutes a strategic objective. Sarah activated another display, showing a schematic of Devourer fleet formations. Council doctrine focuses on destroying enemy vessels and controlling territory. Human doctrine focuses on disrupting enemy capabilities and denying them resources. Elena stood up from her workstation. We've been analyzing devourer behavior patterns, and we've identified what we believe to be a critical vulnerability. They adapt by learning from our actions, but that learning process requires computational resources.
They have to think about what we're doing before they can counter it, Sarah continued. And the more complex and unpredictable our actions become, the more processing power they have to dedicate to analysis instead of combat operations.
Admiral Fexmore's crest flattened against his skull, a sign of deep thought. You're proposing to overwhelm their analytical capabilities. We're proposing to confuse them into paralysis. If we can present them with enough variables, enough contradictions, enough impossible choices, their adaptation systems will become a liability instead of an asset. The war room fell silent as the assembled officers contemplated the implications. What Sarah was describing wasn't just unorthodox, it was antithetical to everything the Council understood about military strategy. Commander Santos from the fortress world of Last Stand spoke up from his position near the tactical displays. Admiral, we've already run preliminary simulations of the tactics you're describing. The results are interesting. Define interesting, Dexmore said dryly. In conventional engagement scenarios, our success rate drops to approximately 12%, Santos admitted. But in scenarios where enemy adaptation is a factor, our effectiveness increases exponentially with the level of tactical chaos we introduce. He activated a new simulation showing human vessels engaging devourer forces using seemingly random attack patterns. The computer model suggests that the enemy's adaptation systems become increasingly unreliable when faced with truly unpredictable behavior.
Chancellor Vexkai leaned forward.
What do you mean by truly unpredictable? Sarah exchanged glances with Elena. That's where things get complicated, Chancellor. Genuine unpredictability can't be simulated or programmed. It has to be improvised by thinking beings making real-time decisions based on incomplete information. Which brings us to the philosophical problem, Elena added. How do you train someone to be unpredictable? How do you coordinate chaos? How do you achieve strategic objectives using tactics that can't be planned in advance? Admiral Fexmore crossed his arms. Those questions have obvious answers, Dr. Vasquez. You can't. You can't, Sarah agreed, if you're thinking like a traditional military commander. But if you're thinking like a human who spent 50 years surviving in hostile territory with insufficient resources and no backup, she gestured to the human fleet organizational chart. Every ship in our fleet is commanded by someone who's learned to make impossible decisions under impossible circumstances. They've spent decades improvising solutions to problems that shouldn't have solutions, finding ways to succeed when success was mathematically impossible. That's our secret weapon, Elena continued. We're not just bringing unconventional tactics to this fight, we're bringing unconventional minds. People who've learned to think outside not just the box, but outside the entire concept of boxes. Chancellor Vexhai's harmonic voice carried a note of wonder. You're describing a form of warfare that would be impossible for us to wage. Exactly. And if it's impossible for you, imagine how the Devourers will react when they try to analyze it. Admiral Fexmore studied the human organizational charts for several minutes, his trained military mind struggling to find coherent patterns in what appeared to be organized chaos. Admiral Chen, he said finally, I have to ask a direct question. Do you actually believe this approach will work, or are you simply desperate enough to try anything?
Sarah considered the question carefully. Both, Admiral.
I believe it'll work because we're desperate enough to try anything. Desperation breeds innovation, and innovation is the enemy of predictability. She walked to the main holographic display and highlighted the Devourer advance vectors. Look at this progression. Methodical, efficient, unstoppable. They're winning because they're better at conventional warfare than we are. They adapt faster, learn quicker, and implement countermeasures more effectively than anything we've ever encountered. But they're also trapped by their own success. They've become so good at learning our patterns that they're dependent on those patterns existing. Take away the patterns, replace them with genuine chaos, and their greatest strength becomes a critical weakness. Elena activated a portable display and projected a series of tactical scenarios. We've identified 17 different ways to create what we're calling cognitive overload in enemy analysis systems. Everything from simultaneous contradictory objectives to deliberately self-defeating attack patterns to tactical decisions that serve no apparent strategic purpose. The goal isn't to win individual battles, Sarah explained. The goal is to make them so focused on trying to understand our behavior that they can't effectively respond to our actions. Commander Santos grinned. It's like fighting someone while juggling blindfolded. They become so fascinated by trying to figure out how you're managing not to fall over that they forget to defend themselves. Admiral Faxmore shook his head slowly. This is the most insane military strategy I've ever heard. Thank you, Sarah replied with complete sincerity. Coming from the galaxy's most decorated conventional commander, I consider that high praise. Chancellor Vexay stood up from his position at the conference table. Admiral, when can your forces be ready for deployment? We're ready now, Chancellor. The beauty of chaos tactics is that you can't really prepare for them. You just have to be willing to embrace the madness and see what happens. And if this doesn't work? Sarah looked around the war room, taking in the faces of beings who represented the finest military minds in galactic civilization. They all shared the same expression, a mixture of desperate hope and profound skepticism. If this doesn't work, Chancellor, then we'll try something else equally insane. And if that doesn't work, we'll try something even more impossible. We'll keep improvising and adapting and confusing the hell out of them until either they're defeated or we run out of ideas. She paused, allowing a small smile to cross her face. And, speaking as someone who spent 50 years turning impossible situations into survival stories, I can promise you that humans are very slow to run out of ideas. Admiral Thexmore stood up from his chair with the deliberate precision that characterized all his movements. Admiral Chen, I want it on record that everything you've described violates fundamental principles of military strategy, contradicts established tactical doctrine, and represents the kind of dangerous thinking that led to your species' exile in the first place. Noted, Sarah replied. I also want it on record, Thexmore continued, that I will be honored to serve under your command in what will undoubtedly be the most unconventional military campaign in galactic history. Chancellor Vexhai's crystalline features brightened with something that might have been relief. Then it's settled. Admiral Chen, the combined forces of the Galactic Council are at your disposal. Show us how humans fight impossible wars. Sarah looked out through the war room's viewport at the assembled fleets. Thousands of ships representing dozens of species, all waiting for orders that would determine the fate of galactic civilization. With pleasure, Chancellor. Let's go teach the Devourers why predictability is overrated. As alarms began sounding throughout the facility and crews rushed to their battle stations, Sarah couldn't help but think that they were about to discover whether 50 years of exile had made humanity wise enough to save the galaxy, or just crazy enough to try. 6 months after the Battle of Proxima Centauri, Admiral Sarah Chen stood once again in the observation deck of Research Station Omega-7, watching the Horsehead Nebula paint the darkness in brilliant shades of red and gold. But this time, she was not alone. The viewport now offered a view of the largest construction project in galactic history, the memorial ring that would eventually encircle the entire nebula in honor of the 3 billion beings who had died during the Devourer War. The war itself had lasted exactly 47 days. 47 days of the most chaotic, unpredictable, and ultimately successful military campaign in recorded history. The Devourers, who had spent 3 years learning to counter every conventional strategy the galaxy could deploy, had been utterly unprepared for an enemy that refused to follow any recognizable patterns. Sarah smiled as she remembered Admiral Thexmore's report from the final battle. The decorated Vorthak commander had spent 6 pages trying to describe human tactics to the Council War Archive, eventually giving up and simply writing, "Analysis impossible. Humans appear to have weaponized insanity. Recommend immediate adoption of human training methodologies for all Council forces." "Admiral!" came a voice from behind her. Sarah turned to see Chancellor Vexake approaching, his crystalline features reflecting the nebula's light in rainbow patterns. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all, Chancellor. I was just thinking about how much has changed." Vexay moved to stand beside her at the viewport.
Indeed, though I confess some changes have been more challenging than others. End of by Sarah chuckled.
The challenges he referred to were the ongoing difficulties of integrating human chaos tactics into conventional council military doctrine.
3 species had formally requested that human advisors be assigned to their military academies. 5 others had petitioned for joint training programs. The Zentari Collective had gone so far as to establish an entire university dedicated to studying what they termed productive unpredictability. "How are the integration programs progressing?" Sarah asked. Slowly, "It appears that teaching rational beings to think irrationally is more difficult than we anticipated." Vex High's harmonic laughter held genuine amusement. Yesterday, a Altarian cadet asked his human instructor to provide a systematic method for being unsystematic. The instructor's response was to assign him to organize his equipment by emotional significance rather than functional category. "That's actually a good exercise," Sarah said. "Emotional categorization creates patterns that logical analysis can't easily predict." Which is exactly what the instructor explained. The cadet spent 6 hours trying to determine the emotional significance of a standard issue datapad before finally admitting that the assignment was impossible. And then the instructor congratulated him for discovering that impossibility is often the first step toward innovation. Sarah nodded approvingly. The integration process would take time, but the fundamental shift in thinking was already beginning to show results. Council forces were reporting unprecedented success rates in anti-piracy operations, first contact scenarios, and even diplomatic negotiations. It seemed that a little chaos was exactly what galactic civilization had been missing. "Chancellor, there's something I wanted to discuss with you," Sarah said. "The Council's offer of permanent residency in the core systems. Vex's crystalline features stilled. You're declining. We're declining. The Human Exile Council voted unanimously to maintain our primary settlements in the Rim territories. May I ask why? The core systems offer resources, infrastructure, and opportunities that the Rim territories cannot match." Sarah gestured toward the viewport, where human construction ships were working alongside vessels from a dozen different species to build the Memorial Ring. "Because out here, we learned something that the core systems seem to have forgotten. We learned that the most important resources aren't material, they're intellectual and spiritual." She turned to face Vexai directly. 50 years of isolation taught us to question everything, to find new solutions to old problems, and to value innovation over tradition. That's not something we can maintain if we integrate too completely into existing galactic civilization. You're choosing to remain partially separate. We're choosing to remain human. But that doesn't mean we're choosing isolation. Sarah activated a holographic display showing the new treaty frameworks that had emerged from the post-war negotiations. The alliance structures we've established allow for cooperation without assimilation, exchange without integration. The new agreements were unprecedented in their complexity and flexibility. Humanity would maintain autonomous control over the Rim territories while providing military advisors and innovative technologies to Council forces. Human settlements would serve as research and development centers for experimental approaches to everything from terraforming to diplomatic protocol. Most importantly, the galaxy had formally recognized what they termed cognitive diversity as a strategic resource to be protected rather than a problem to be solved. "There is one more thing," Vexhai said quietly. "The Council has commissioned a comprehensive study of the exile decision. The preliminary findings suggest that the vote to banish humanity was based on incomplete information and flawed analysis." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Incomplete how?" "The species that voted for exile focused primarily on human military capabilities and aggressive tendencies. They failed to adequately consider human adaptability, creativity, and capacity for innovation under pressure. In other words, they judged us based on our weaknesses rather than our strengths. More than that, they judged you based on traits that they feared rather than traits that they needed." Vex's voice carried a note of sadness. "The irony is that the very characteristics that led to your exile were exactly the characteristics that ultimately saved us all." Sarah considered this. "What will the Council do with these findings?" "The official report will be released next month, along with a formal acknowledgement that the exile decision was an error in judgment. But more importantly, the Council is implementing new protocols for evaluating species diversity. Never again will a civilization be punished for thinking differently. That's something at least." There's also been a proposal to establish the Chen Institute for Innovative Strategic Thinking. It would be a joint council human facility dedicated to developing unconventional approaches to complex problems. Sarah felt a surge of pride mixed with amusement. "Chancellor, I'm honored. But I'm not sure I want my name associated with an institution dedicated to organized chaos. Actually, the proposal suggests that the apparent contradiction in that phrase makes it perfectly appropriate." They stood in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching the construction crews work on the Memorial Ring. The project would take decades to complete, but when finished, it would serve as a reminder of both the cost of rigid thinking and the value of creative solutions. "Admiral," Bexahai said eventually, "there's a question I've wanted to ask you since the day you returned. Were you confident that your tactics would work, or were you simply desperate enough to try anything?" Sarah thought back to those final hours before the first engagement, when she had stood on the bridge of the Prometheus watching Devourer forces approach in their precise mathematical formations. "Honestly, I had no idea if our approach would work, but I knew that conventional tactics had failed completely, and I knew that humans had survived 50 years in exile by refusing to accept that any problem was truly unsolvable. So it was desperation. It was hope, Sarah corrected. Hope backed up by 50 years of evidence that impossible situations often have impossible solutions if you're willing to look for them. She gestured toward the human construction ships working on the memorial ring. Look at those crews, Chancellor. Half of them are using tools and techniques that didn't exist 6 months ago, solving engineering problems that the galaxy's best minds said were impossible. They're not doing it because they're desperate. They're doing it because they've learned that impossible is just another word for interesting. Vexay's crystalline features shifted in what Sarah had learned to recognize as deep thought. Admiral, there's something else the Council would like to discuss with you. We've received preliminary reports of unusual energy signatures from the Andromeda Galaxy. Nothing definitive, but the patterns are concerning. Sarah felt a familiar chill. Another extragalactic threat? Possibly. Or possibly just natural phenomena that we don't understand. But given our recent experiences, the Council feels that investigation is warranted. And you want human involvement. We want human perspective. If there is another threat out there, we'd rather discover it with the benefit of innovative thinking rather than wait for it to demonstrate our conventional approaches are inadequate. Sarah nodded slowly. The request made sense, but it also highlighted how much the galaxy's relationship with humanity had changed. 6 months ago, they had been exiled outcasts. Now they were being asked to lead investigations into potential cosmic threats. I'll discuss it with the Exile Council, she said, though I suspect they'll be interested. Humans have always been curious about what lies beyond the horizon. Even when that curiosity leads to dangerous discoveries? Sarah smiled. Especially then, Chancellor. Safe discoveries don't teach you anything new. As if summoned by their conversation, Commander Elena Vasquez's voice came over the station's communication system. Admiral Chen to the communication center, priority message from Earth. Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. Communication with Earth had been restored only 3 months ago, and every transmission still carried emotional weight for the exiled generation. Excuse me, Chancellor. Earth is calling. She made her way through the station's corridors to the communication center, where Elena was waiting with a mixture of excitement and concern on her face. What is it? Sarah asked. Admiral, you need to see this. Elena activated the main display, showing a transmission from Earth's newly reconstructed Council embassy. The image resolved into a young woman wearing the uniform of the Earth Diplomatic Corps, an organization that had been disbanded 50 years ago and only recently re-established.
Admiral Chen, the woman said. My name is Captain Lisa Chen Rodriguez, Earth Diplomatic Corps.
I'm transmitting from Earth Prime, and I have a message from the people of Earth to the people of the human exile fleet.
Sarah's breath caught.
Captain Chen Rodriguez looked to be about 30 years old, which meant she had been born well after the exile. This was a member of the generation that had grown up.